So, welcome to this meeting today, in which my intention is to provide a broad overview of the main issues that certainly have been of concern to me over the past few years and now increasingly in the last few months and weeks. And because there are so many issues to cover here, I'm going to go through them very quickly. Here today, I'm speaking to a group of people who are of faith, but there will be people watching this as we go forward who may not have any particular faith, but just be concerned about the issues I'm speaking about today, or simply be wanting to be informed about what's happening. It's my duty and responsibility to inform the wider world about what I see as being the things that are happening. So I'm going to cover, in very broad terms, the big issues that I see are the map of what's happening in the United Kingdom, and then, rather more briefly, to go into the rest of the world. And there isn't a particular order here, but perhaps there is some degree of direction in what I'm sharing here. So, what are the key issues that I believe are affecting and afflicting and infecting our nation here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Well, perhaps starting from the top down, because fish rots from the head, it's Keir Starmer and his minority Labour government, which I believe are driving the United Kingdom towards destruction. Their primary responsibility they have failed in, which is to keep the people of this nation safe. They've failed in that, and I'll touch upon that in just a moment, but primarily through the open borders, but also the destruction of our economy. But the biggest challenge facing us at the moment, the existential threat, is that Starmer and his minority Labour government, by the way, they're minority because only 20% of the voting public voted for them. And I would think that many of them now have got buyer's remorse. But their primary responsibility at the moment, and his in particular, is that have entered into a foreign conflict without consultation with or consent of the people. And the existential threat we now face is that of a third world war. These people are banging the drums for war, not aware of how serious the potential conflict would be. And of course, they've talked, as did Sunak, about potential conscription of young men and presumably young women into a military conflict. Starmer also has been responsible, building on the dreadful foundation of Boris Johnson and David Cameron and Theresa May and everyone who went before, right back to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, the problem of uncontrolled mass migration and the impact upon the UK economy, our healthcare system, and other public service systems has been exponentially bad for us. We are unable to deal with the problems that this uncontrolled mass of people, it's now estimated 1.5 million illegal immigrants, migrants in this country. They're economic migrants. Mostly they are military-aged men who have no sense of loyalty to Britain and our heritage, which I'll touch upon in a minute. But there's an intrinsic danger to children, to women, and to men arising from large numbers of unvetted military-aged men who do not share Britain's cultural, moral, or Christian values. Whether people in this nation, and it's only a small minority, I think, of secularists and humanists, like it or not, Britain is a Christian country with 2 millennia of heritage and history. And it is only because of that heritage and history that this nation has the kind of openness that it has had always for centuries to people who may be struggling in their own nation. But the impact of uncontrolled mass migration, which is all part of a foolish and failed experiment called multiculturalism, which, by the way, through the 90s in my public service career, I thought was right. I thought it was okay. And I would even argue for it. Because I was trying to help communities to get on with each other. I was training the police and public service personnel to understand the problems that arise when cross-cultural communication breaks down. I didn't understand myself how serious this problem was. And that's part of the Kool-Aid that so many people have drunk. And we've got to somehow wake them up from. And this has led to the erosion of Britain's historic Christian heritage. But it's not only that, it's been the impact of some 60 years or so of the work of the mass media, of academic institutions, to the extent that now today, indigenous British people, especially white men, are being taught that they need to be ashamed of who they are. That comes from critical theory and critical race theory, which is it's fundamentally communism redressed for a Western market. So we've got the downgrading of Britain's history and culture, so that people, especially, as I say, white men and now white boys, are being taught to hate themselves for who they are. We've got censorship of free speech in the United Kingdom, led by the state, media bias led by the BBC, which is, although it's the British Broadcasting Corporation, would be more appropriately termed the British Brainwashing Corporation, followed up with mainstream media. And anyone who believes the BBC or mainstream media, The Guardian, or any of those press, actually is listening to fake news. There may be an element of truth within it, but much of it is very disingenuous, it's tendentious, it leads people down a particular pathway of thinking. And it's, in the main, far left, Marxist, communist, socialist, liberal doctrine and dogma. We've seen big tech abusing the people who use social media, banning and shadow banning. And perhaps people who are watching this or listening to this may have experienced that themselves. And we now have, for the first time in my memory, political prisoners in the United Kingdom. And there's one particular individual who has been held in solitary confinement for many months now, 23 hours a day. And even to mention his name can result in some of our social media posts being banned. But this is a dreadful situation. And we're very grateful for the intervention of people like J.D. Vance and Elon Musk and other external journalists who are taking up the case of this particular individual, but also speaking about the problems we're having. Another problem we have, this is the seventh in my list, is the rise of Islamization in the United Kingdom. This is perhaps the other internal existential threat facing us. The use of the term Islamophobia, people are fearful of the rise of Islamization. It's with legitimacy, but it's being used as a cover to support the radical change of Britain to become an Islamic caliphate. And everyone who is of goodwill and good faith, who wants to see the preservation not only of British values, but of freedom generally in the United Kingdom, needs to be taking action, contacting their local MPs, contacting Angela Rayner, who wants to lead a council to promote this idea of an Islamophobia law and a blasphemy law. Blasphemy laws in Britain were repealed for the most part in 2008. They were there because Britain's a Christian country. So if there is no need anymore to have a blasphemy law in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, which is a Christian country, where there is an established Church of England, we certainly do not need to have a blasphemy law to cover any other religion, which is a recent entry to this nation. So it is time for the people of this nation, whatever their background, to stand up and say, we don't want this. So this is a very serious issue that needs to be addressed. None of this is about racism or anything of that sort. And I would not be guilty of such an activity myself, being someone who has experienced what racial prejudice really is. Frankly, I think the time has come to expunge many of these isms from our
Mm,
dictionary because all they have done is to sow division and discord in our
mm,
nation, which of course is what communists want. That's what Marxists, socialists want to see. The more people rely upon identity politics and are against each other, then we have the uprising. Everyone wants to say, this is what I'm entitled to. Well, 1917 saw the Bolshevik Revolution. 5 years later, Vladimir Lenin was dead. He'd suffered from three strokes. His proteges went on to cause great havoc in what became the USSR. We never want to see that. This does not work well for the people. We've seen abuse and criminal acts against white girls and women, mainly by men of Pakistani Muslim origin. Now, here's some good news. Ben Habib was on holiday, and while he was in Dubai in the last few days, he met with an old friend of his who is in Pakistan, who's very senior in the intelligence services there in Pakistan. And he has said, we in Pakistan have a treaty with the UK government signed in 2018 to return to us all those people who have been involved in crimes such as PAED philia against children and RAPE. And they want these people to be returned so that they can face the full force of Pakistani law. The time has come to stop hiding behind the threats of racism and so on. And we should call out people in politics who are using this as a cover. We know that the Labour Party rely on the Muslim vote.
mm.
And we need to call them out for that and say we will not have this in our country. Segue then to another serious problem in Britain, the infection of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in public services without public consent and at great public cost. We were never consulted to ask us, any of us, whether we want a diversity, equity, and inclusion in the National Health Service. No, we don't. We want people to be treated. We want more nurses and doctors. We want people to be treated with kindness and care, and for nurses and frontline staff to be properly paid and recognized for the great job that they do. We don't need DEI. So if 9,500 staff are going to go, DEI and everyone who's involved, they need to be at the top of that pyramid as we start slicing down. Moving on then to other problems that we've got. Remember, we're looking at a map of what's happening in the UK. The persecution of Christians in the UK. This has been going on for 20 years or
Mm,
more. Serious persecution. There's always been an antagonism towards Christians in the United Kingdom. People have been fearful of sharing their faith. But now we're seeing many losing employment, losing their businesses because of their religious convictions. We've had arrests of people, two particularly, a woman and a man, because of their thoughts, because they were praying in their heads. We've had arrests of numerous street preachers. We have a right to preach in public. This is an absolute given. And the police are not at liberty to go there and arrest people simply because they're reading from the Bible or preaching the gospel and seeking to tell people about the love of God. And then we have problems with British policing. It's now a very popular and common term, two-tier policing. The reality is this: many constables, don't call them officers, they're constables. Many constables do not understand the sovereign right of the people or of the responsibility of police constables to serve the people. Remember, a police constable is only, no more than this, is only another citizen in uniform, and they are meant to stand under their oath. They are there to serve the people, to keep the public safe. They're not there to threaten people. They're not there to lord it over them. They are the servants of the people. And we need to remind them if police constables are not doing that, all they are people dressed up in police costume. And they're not serving the people. The problem is that many police constables are not properly educated in the law. They often do not know what are the limits of their authority, and they don't understand what are the rights of the people. And then we have inequality before the law itself. The court system now has many judges who are corrupt. We have a corrupt judiciary who are acting on personal, political, or ideological bias. And we need to have a system, a better system of removing judges at all levels. In America, the intention is that the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi are going to be impeaching corrupt judges. There have been many corrupt judges who have inappropriately, injudiciously, and I would think illegally and unlawfully dealt with people like President Donald Trump, but many others. And they need to be brought to account. If a nation cannot trust its judiciary, then law and order has gone. Anarchy then rules. And if the people of Britain are serious about wanting to keep our democratic society in the same way that the American people are concerned about keeping their republic, then we need to deal with this problem that's taken place in law enforcement and in the judicial system. And of course, we need to deal with what's going on in Parliament. Then we have another huge problem. We have a massive problem with the laundering of public money overseas. It's called foreign aid, but it rarely reaches the people who really need it. In fact, what foreign aid is doing is simply supporting imperialism and colonialism through the enforcement of far left, woke, liberal ideology and identity politics. So, against the wishes and the religious convictions and the cultural norms of people in the developing world, the United Kingdom and the United States as well, and European nations, has been exporting its own particular minority view about how life should be lived, particularly in relation to sexual politics. And this is utterly unacceptable. And we need to call this out. It's the laundering of public resources. And of course, it's gone to a conflict in which we have no legal or lawful interest and should never have been involved in. Then we have this problem of RSE, relationships and sexuality education. This is not at all about helping children to be better citizens or better informed. It is only this. It is the indoctrination of children into LGBTQ plus ideology. Now, if human beings in Britain want to engage in their own particular sexual predilections, preferences, and propensities, that is their choice to do so in private, but not to bring it into the schools or to enforce it through some form of mechanism which parents have no opportunity to be consulted on or to input into. This has to stop. It's a breach of statutory safeguarding requirements. If you look at some of the materials that have been brought into schools, and Dr. Lisa Nolan is doing an excellent series on this about sex-proofing your kids, you will see it is pornographic. It is utterly unacceptable for children of any age in school to be exposed to this kind of material. And whereas at one time, people who were interested in PAED philia would be called that, now it's people who are attracted to minors. We need to see that's the end of this route. That's where this goes to. And alongside this has been a dismissal of parental rights and a criminal lack of transparency by educators. It seems to me that if educators are involved in a process which is breaching statutory safeguarding requirements, that sounds to me as though they are colluding in a criminal act which involves the abuse of children. Then segue on to other concerns. Remember, we're mapping these problems out across the United Kingdom and that are facing us now. existential threats. We now have unaffordable energy costs as a consequence of having to shell out huge amounts of money to pay for our gas and electricity. We can't be supporting other people's needs. And Keir Starmer had the temerity to lie to the British people on a so-called press conference in which he had all these notes and questions and who was going to ask the questions. Unlike Donald Trump, who goes to the back of Air Force One, just opens the door and says any questions. But one of the things that he said, and this was the most egregious of lies, it was to point the finger at the Russian Federation for our high energy bills. It has nothing to do with us. We have high energy bills because Boris Johnson was running down coal-fired power and shutting down fossil fuels in this country because Ed Miliband has taken up that baton and he's forcing us to have so-called renewable energy from solar power and from wind, even though these are destroying the countryside. Windmills that are in the channel are destroying marine life, and where they're on land, they are a huge threat to the wildlife population. Our unaffordable energy is because of the Green New scam and the precipitous dash towards the cliff of net zero, which simply means that we have a dystopian future where everyone is cold, where we no longer have proper food to eat, and we can't afford to own our own homes, which is why Klaus Schwab said, you will own nothing and you will be happy. No, under communism, yes, no one owns anything because they believe in the collective, but no one is happy. And all that happens is that's a race to the bottom. So there's a war on cars with Sadiq Khan's ULEZ, which is making it impossible for people on low incomes to be able to move around freely. So it's an abuse of our human rights because we don't have freedom of movement. And they're destroying farming in Britain. There's an absence, and this is the result of all of this, an absence of integrity in political and in religious leadership, which has resulted in the destruction of public trust in Parliament, the Church of England, in public institutions, in the BBC and the media. What that means is that our nation has crumbled. Every institution upon which we used to rely, which gave us that sense of it's good to be in Britain, and the reason why people still try and come here, they don't know what's going on, or perhaps they do, and they come into the candy store and it's open season for anyone who wants to come here. All of those institutions have broken down. So the time has come now for the people in Britain to stand up and be counted, because only we, the people of Britain, can save. And if you are a person who believes in the Bible and is a follower of Jesus Christ, it's up to us as well. But here's the problem. Christians and churches are asleep at the wheel. They have been for 60 years, but it's got even worse. Left-leaning liberalism is now ascendant over orthodox, socially conservative consensus amongst Christians. And so this idea of progressive Christianity, embracing the culture, rather than influencing it, allowing the world and its culture to press us into its mold rather than challenging it, has become the norm for many Christian leaders, many Christian pastors, and sadly, many people who are in Christian churches. Apathy, indifference, disinterest, and lack of motivation to engage in the public square on high stakes issues, the really big things that are in our culture. These have created a yawning gap in our country, a vacuum where there is no longer a religious drive. But without religion in a country that is built on religion, on the Christian faith, then there is a huge vacuum which other forces will come in to fill. So many Christians, so many Christian leaders, pastors, parachurch organizations have been driven by fear, also by self-centeredness, by mistaken theological views. Some of you have asked me about this on governmental authority. That's the Romans 13 scripture, which talks about being in submission to those in authority, which is a biblical requirement until the government goes against the Bible. And at that point, as with Dietrich Bonhoeffer in 1930s Germany, that's the point at which you say, no, it stops. Or early Christians who refused to burn incense to Caesar. Remember, Jesus said, render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and that which is God's to God. So when the early Christians were told, you must now burn incense to Caesar, Caesar is not God. The government is not God. And thank God for Trump, who said he is not the main man. There's someone above him. And he gave glory to the God of heaven and to Jesus Christ. And so we're also finding that the Christians are mistaken in their views of eschatology. And some of you have asked me about this, and I will do a longer talk about it. But they're saying, oh, Jesus is coming. There's a rapture, and therefore we don't really need to be worried or concerned about trying to change the governance of our, not the government, the governance of our nation and nations. They couldn't be more wrong. Read the first 3 pages of the Bible, chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Genesis. That's all about government and politics because God is into government and politics. And He gave the first human beings that He created the responsibility to guard and govern and guide and develop the creation that He gave to them under His delegated power. And we also have Christians and churches who are producing friendly fire against those who stand up to be counted. I've experienced it on social media, but that's fine. As far as I'm concerned, bring it on. Let's have the conversation, but let's do it in a respectful, courteous manner. And let's be willing to listen to the discussions. All too often, this is all that's happened with people of any stripe, not just Christians, when they've been antagonistic against the worldview that we present, they simply throw out a whole range of talking points. They're just labels, they're sound bites, rather than engaging in an educated and intelligent way with the argument. And so what we're finding, and I'm working on now, is we need to redefine Britain's historic values and what it means historically to be a citizen of this nation. And I'm working on that because it's important that as we move forward into these next few years, as we seek to win at the ballot box through a socially conservative center right consensus, we need to be able to have a whole range of policies, but we also need to say to people, this is what it means to be British. If you want to be a British citizen, it's not only about being able to answer a few questions. We need you to know that you need to be part of who we are and owning our values. And then as we look abroad, we look across to the USA, to the EU, and other nations. And I'll be very brief here. We've got a number of lies about the Ukraine conflict. What is going on in Ukraine is not an act of unprovoked aggression by the Russian Federation, but it is a historic inevitability due to a proxy war of aggression by the US with NATO against Russia, and driven by the US's determination for regime change, something they've been doing in many countries for the last 50 years. It's their desire for perpetual conflict to feed the military industrial complex and to maintain US hegemony, which is political, economic, and military dominance across the world. That is what is behind this. Now, there are other layers underneath this, such as the US-led coup in 2014, which led to the present approach that the government of Ukraine has taken, the genocide against its own ethnic Russian-speaking Ukrainians. And it is because of that that the Russian Federation, it's the Russian parliament, by the way, who specifically voted to have this special military operation. I think it's important to be aware of that. But there are many other facts that people are not aware of. And then we've got President Donald Trump, who is focused on rebuilding America's economy, rebuilding their values, their faith, and their future. Look, they have uncovered $105 billion of public waste and fraud. They've been making Social Security payments to people who are so healthy they've lived 300 years. That's what's happening. And of course, the mainstream media will not cover this. Here's the thing. President Trump hopes to be able to take everyone who pays income tax but earns $150,000 or less out of the income tax system. I'd love to see that happening here in Britain. I'd love to see income tax completely abolished for people in that kind of level. Now, that would cover most people listening to this talk. And we can do it. There are ways of doing it. Just go on to any of the websites that look at the amount of money we've got in Britain. When I was standing as the independent parliamentary candidate in the general election in 2024, I found £28 billion in central services budgets of the NHS. That's basically people who sit on their bottoms drinking tea or push paper around the place or don't even turn up for work. And I said we should just return this to the front line of the NHS so that we can begin to start running our hospitals properly. So that's President Trump. Vice President J.D. Vance has been calling out the EU and the UK for crushing free speech and destroying democracy. He talked recently about how the EU is risking civilizational suicide caused by censorship and open borders. We have major problems in the European Union and here in Britain because of these open borders. We've got to deal with it. Yes, we need to see mass deportations, but at the moment, no one is willing who has any kind of political platform to talk about that. And then we've got EU leaders. I call them the coalition of the deluded, with no mandate from anyone. They are all people who failed up, every single one of them. I would never employ them, and I've run good businesses. So the EU is run by global powers influenced by dark forces, human and cosmic. They're determined to control the people. This has been the history of the human race since the Tower of Babel. And they are willing to risk a third world war because of an insane desire to destroy Russia and to control what's going on across the world and to have a one world government, a one world religion. And this is not at the end, this particular point, but it's actually a major issue. Children are going missing and have been going missing on an industrial scale. And there's denial and silence around this. When President Trump was asked what did he think had happened to the 150,000 plus children who had been taken from Guatemala and trafficked into the center of the United States, he said, sadly, I think they're probably all dead, having been trafficked as sex slaves and used in all sorts of other ritual abuse. An awful, awful situation facing them. But the same is happening here in Britain. And then, of course, and this is my final point, the persecution of Christians. Now it's center stage for us in Syria and across the world. An absolutely appalling situation. So as I come to the conclusion of this talk, what is to be done? Well, I believe we need to reflect very carefully on these issues. I've mapped out, there are many others, but these, I believe, are the headline issues. They're certainly the ones that are in my mind and thoughts and reflections and prayers on a daily basis. And I believe that we can turn this around. I believe that there is every opportunity that people of good faith can come together. Here in Britain, I believe there's tremendous opportunity if we can come together, if we can pool all of our resources. My own campaign is called Changing Britain for Good. And I believe that with prayer, with faith, we can begin to see Britain changed for good.